Steve Hargadon, and we're in day 2 of Library 2.012. This has really been a blast. Thanks everybody for coming and participating in this activity. Thanks to our sponsors and supporters, especially thanks to San Jose State University, a terrific partner in the conference. Sandy Hirsch is the co-chair. Just a great experience working with them. Thanks also to Fallout Software and Mighty Bell and Blackboard Collaborate. So this is a chance for you to let us know where you're participating from. As people join in, please encourage them, but also let us know location, time, temperature, and the like. Look for the star icon, the second one down on the left. Click on that and click on the map. I'm in Park City, Utah. We had 2 lovely sessions from Hungary a couple of hours ago. It was very fun. Well, wherever you are, thanks for being with us. If you're listening to the recording, thanks so much. Dave, I think you'll have people coming in from the other session, but I would say it's worth starting just because of the timing, and so I sure appreciate your being here.
Thank you for having me. Actually, Steve, can you tell me if while I'm talking, is this can other people talk as well, or do I have to? Does my talking mute everybody else? The way God intended.
You can. I can give everybody mic permissions, but only 6 people at a time can grab the microphone and talk. Although that would be way too many anyway. But however you'd like to handle it, I will manage for you.
That sounds good. I do have something like a coherent, well, I'm not sure it's actually coherent, but on paper it's coherent anyway, set of things to say. So it's not quite as rambling as it might sound, but if people want to stop me with questions or whatever, that would be fine too. And so I want to talk about libraries as platforms. I actually want to give an argument for considering libraries as platforms. And by the way, if you cannot hear me now, you need to let me know, because I think I'm broadcasting. So the idea of a library as a platform is obviously not an original idea. It's not an entirely new idea. Various people have put this forward in various forms. They've meant different things by platforms. And this idea certainly is being applied elsewhere in the world. Tim O'Reilly, for a couple of years, has been talking about government as a platform. But let me tell you why I think the idea actually has some value. And I'll tell you how I, in particular, am taking it. So the advantages are, I think, that if you think of a library as a platform, first of all, it shakes loose some ideas. It's a reframing, and that has some benefits as well as some drawbacks. One is it enables you to see things in a different context, at least as an experiment. Second of all, it's a unifying framework. The way that I'm understanding it, the way I'm going to propose the nature of a platform, it embraces both the physical library space and the digital. And I think it's good to not to begin with either one of those, but to begin with instead with something that embraces both. Third, libraries platform, I think, provides a way of embracing the importance of social networks without the trivial sense that social networks often, the concept often has in many people's minds, even though social networks are, I think, a fundamental new formation in our culture. And maybe the most important advantage to the library's platform idea, as I'll try to explain it, is that it's a way of increasing the value of the library, both to its users, which obviously counts for a lot, and within the new networked world, within the web itself. And so increasing the value of the library, especially these days when libraries and their budgets are being challenged, I think is actually a really important thing to do. But that doesn't tell you what I mean by a platform. So one of the ways of approaching this is to say, well, a platform as opposed to what? Well, as opposed to the idea that a library is a set of resources which include both the books and CDs and the rest of the content, as well as the expertise of the librarians and the processes and so forth that the library has, all of which are obviously tremendously valuable. But a platform doesn't look at a library as fundamentally a set of resources. And in particular these days, the platform idea I think should be drawn in contrast to the idea of a library as a portal. A portal is a very mid-1990s way of thinking about the web. It's a set of portals. Library's portal envisions the web access to the library as access simply to the, or primarily to the content, as well as to some of the online services. Well, a platform is not a portal. A portal is one of the services that a platform offers. It's a very important service, but a platform is something different. So that's what platform as opposed to what. And I do mean platform primarily in the software sense, but not primarily as a vehicle for software. So in the software sense, a platform is something that provides software tools and services and access to data, and opens these up and allows people, developers, to create new applications. Applications that maybe nobody ever thought of, that they're innovative. For example, the iPhone is a platform. It's a closed platform, but it's a platform. So it provides a set of tools for a developer to create an app that runs on the iPhone and only on the iPhone. It's one of the ways in which it's closed and is the instrument of the devil, but that's a different topic. It provides tools. It provides access to some data, such as user data. If you're a developer writing an app for the iPhone, you do not have to start from the beginning and try to figure out how you're going to let users log in and do verification, all that sort of stuff, because that's part of the platform that you're given as a developer. Likewise, Android is a platform. Facebook turned itself into a platform so that if you are a developer, you can get access to tools, services, and data and build a Facebook app. Microsoft.net is another platform, relatively closed platform, but nevertheless. Okay, so that's the software sense of platform that I primarily have in mind, but I'm not proposing that we think about libraries as platforms primarily for creating software. I'm really interested in that possibility. I co-direct a library innovation lab that, in fact, that's what we do all the time. So I'm very enthusiastic about that. But I am not suggesting that libraries as platforms are primarily about creating software. Rather, so what gets built on this platform? I think what gets built on the library platform is the cultural enrichment and the absorption of what libraries know, which we do together. That is a social activity. It is not primarily an individual who's interacting with the library and getting private individual benefit. Of course, that's true too, but the sort of thing that gets built on top of a library platform, as I'm proposing it, is not primarily individual enrichment. Rather, it's social enrichment. It's enrichment of the community. So I want to give an extended example of what I mean by looking at one particular type of community, which is a knowledge-based community, which could be anything from scholars who are researching something to a set of people who have a common question or a common interest, or even an evanescent gathering of people around a particular question or topic at a particular moment. So I'm going to use knowledge as an example because that's what I've been writing and thinking about. And this, as I say, this is going to also because I work at a university library, and so knowledge networks are part of the core mission. Nevertheless, so in order to see what's happening with the networking of knowledge, I want to go back very quickly to the traditional nature of knowledge, and then give a handful of examples. I hope relatively quick examples of the sort of knowledge networks that I see developing. So traditionally in the West, knowledge has had a few properties. There are a bunch of them, but they are things like knowledge has always been relatively scarce because it's the result of filtering out all of the noise and the wrong opinions and the false beliefs. So knowledge has been the result of filtering, and thus relatively scarce. Second of all, we generally don't talk about knowing something unless all disagreement about it has been resolved. If it's still in question, we say we don't know yet. And so knowledge is that which has been nailed down, or that which has been settled, or that from which all disagreement has been driven, where all disagreement actually means all disagreement by reasonable people, which in turn means all the people who we have accepted into our little, or large echo chamber. We marginalize people who don't get on board with the mainstream view of what's known. So it's settled. Knowledge is something that is settled. Third thing is that it's orderly, that we think that knowledge forms a system. In the West, and we've been very clear about this, in fact, to know what something is has been traditionally, for about 2,500 years in the West, to know where it fits into the knowledge ecology. So I just want to make sure that I'm audible. And second of all, if I'm not being intelligible, you should let me know that too. Okay, Steve says, yes, I am audible. I will continue. So it's absolute, and fourth property of traditional knowledge is that the system of knowledge that we've developed is a series of stopping points. That's been, in fact, the great benefit of knowledge in the West. So that when you ask a question, you know where to go. You can trust the response that you get because you went to an expert or you read a book that is a result of expert filtering. And you can stop asking, and thus you can move on to new topics. And so this has been a very efficient system of knowledge, but it is a system that is based around providing stopping points. All four of these properties are, in fact, also properties of the traditional medium of knowledge, which is, of course, paper and books and libraries. It's clearly, at least to me, clearly not an accident. This is the argument I'm making is obviously very much a Marshall McLuhan argument, and I think in this case he nailed it. This is right, unless I'm wrong, of course. So knowledge is scarce and it's filtered, just like books and other printed matter. Its knowledge is settled, just like ink settles into paper and cannot be undone. It's inflexible, and so our idea of knowledge has also been that it is what is finished, done, settled, and ready to be printed. Traditional knowledge is orderly. Well, books are very orderly, libraries are very orderly, and in all these cases, in the real world, you can only have one order of things at a time. If you organize alphabetically, you cannot also organize by topic. Obviously, you can organize alphabetically within a topic, but that's also one choice. You get one way of ordering in the physical world. And we have imported that terrible, terrible limitation into our idea of knowledge, as if ideas are subject to the same limitation as the physical world, which is a tragedy, has been a tragedy for our culture, and an inevitable tragedy, because McLuhan is right, at least to some degree, and that was all that the medium allowed. And fourth, knowledge consists of stopping points. Well, paper just is that way. It's a very disconnected medium. There are footnotes that point out, but you cannot just click on them in paper and get to the result. And so we've structured how we, not only how we communicate knowledge, but how we structure it, what we think knowledge looks like around this limitation, that it's a disconnected medium. So when you write a book, you try to get everything the reader needs between the covers, because you know you can't say Oh, why don't you go out to the library, go back to the library, get on a bus, go find a book that will cover this topic, and then come back when you're done. No, we try to get everything into the work. And so scarce and filtered, settled, orderly, stopping points, characteristics of traditional knowledge, also of libraries, but now we have a new medium. And this new medium, I believe, is imparting its properties to knowledge just as the old medium did. And so knowledge, by hypothesis is anyway, knowledge now lives in networks. Excuse me. And networks of a particular sort, internet sort of networks, and is taking on the properties of these networks. So I want to give you a few examples, because I don't mean anything fancy-dancy by knowledge networks. They're all around us. Every one of us uses them all the time. I'm going to hit the mute button and cough for a little while. Please talk amongst yourselves. Okay, that's better. Oh, thank you for the plug, Peggy. The examples I'm about to give are on purpose very prosaic, because I believe this new form of knowing has already become quite common in our culture, and we just need to we just look around and see it everywhere. So I'm not saying, well, there's new software that you need to install in order to enable knowledge networks. No, we're already doing this. The debate last night. If you, assuming you are American and you cared about the debate, and you have some questions from it, just how much was Mitt Romney lying? The answer is, by the way, the more specific he got, the more lying he got. And I'm happy to take these, the rebuttal as soon as I'm done talking. So you have questions about the debate, about some particular aspect of it. Of course, you went out onto the web to find out. That's by far the best choice at this point. You Googled, or you went to one of the sites that you go to. If you're a Democrat, maybe you went to Daily Kos. If you're a Republican, maybe you went to Red State or one of your sites to see what people were saying, and you watched that conversation. That's a little knowledge network. Not the best example, because these are very partisan ones. You might have gone to a less obviously committed set of sources as well. It's highly likely that you came across a set of beliefs that varied and differed and were linked to one another. The differences may have been huge. It might have been a Romney supporter versus an Obama supporter, or they may have been small because it's two Democrats at Daily Kos who were disagreeing about something within a much smaller range. But they are connected in their disagreement and in their difference, and you got smarter because you saw that disagreement. The knowledge now is not in any one of those particular nodes. It's not in the one particular expert that you might consult, but rather it's that expert in conversation within a network. Maybe a community, may just be a network that's come together for a moment. So that's maybe not the greatest example, but it's actually a pretty good example. I'll give you a clearer example because it's more clearly focused on knowledge and less on partisan opinion. So in 1919, the New York Times ran on the front page an article describing the experiment that proved that Einstein was right. Very dramatic experiment, and you might have read that and been fascinated by it and had some questions and wanted to explore further. Your curiosity was really piqued, but you couldn't because all you had was that rectangle of information, and you could go no further with it because that's how paper works. That's how newspapers worked. Now, if it's 2011 and there's new data, the faster than light neutrino controversy, in which data came from a very reputable source, the most reputable source for particle physics these days, suggesting that Einstein might be wrong. And the people who came up with this dramatic data posted it at archive.org, A-R-X-I-V, which is a site where any scientist with any standing can post anything that he wants with no peer review, just put it up there. They put it up there instantly, even though they could have gotten the cover of any major physics journal, but they didn't. They put it up into a non-peer-reviewed site precisely so a network of discussion would develop, as it did. Dozens and dozens and dozens of papers and hundreds and thousands of comments of all sorts from mainstream media, from blogs, from experts, from amateurs, explanations at every level of education and learning, endless links. You could spend the rest of your life exploring this network of knowledge. This network had value only because people disagreed, only because they were saying different things. If they're all saying the same thing, it would have negative value. Actually, Peggy, that's arxiv.org. So it was this difference and disagreement, the unsettled nature of knowledge, that made this knowledge network so valuable. That's a very big change. That is a very, very big change from our idea of what knowledge is. It goes from being the settled content about which we all agree to the network content about which we disagree, about which we have differences. So that's a big change in the nature of knowledge. I'll give you another example. Library of Congress posted a series of World War II color photos. They posted them on Flickr as an experiment, which was hugely successful, so everybody could see them, but also because the Library of Congress didn't have the resources to carefully go through them with their normal care and post them. So they put them up on Flickr so they could crowdsource the gathering of metadata. So at Flickr, as I'm sure you all know, you can not only see the photo, but they have a set of tools that allow you to add information, including tags. And so people almost immediately added dozens and dozens, actually 75, the maximum number of tags to some of these photos. There's one in particular that I like, which is of a woman in a factory working with a probe on some cables. And it got tagged with all sorts of things, including the sorts of tags professionals would apply, like 1942, which was the year it was in, or factory, or World War II. But also with some idiosyncratic tags that are not very useful to the public at large, some tags that were unusual, like it was tagged red because the woman's lipstick is red and the probe tip is red, and even though that's a small percentage of the photo, actually once you see the tag, you say, oh yeah, no, actually, it's like an aesthetic judgment. These reds are very important to the photo. And somebody, and this is actually my point, somebody tagged it Rosie the Riveter. Now, as you probably know, that was not a picture of Rosie the Riveter because she was imaginary, she was fictitious. She stood for women in the workforce in World War II. So this was a wrong tag. It was an inaccurate tag, which no professional would apply because you don't apply false tags. But it's a really useful tag because if you click on that tag at Flickr, you get lots of photos of women in factories in World War II, and if you're interested in that topic, this tag's really valuable. So here we have a system that allows this crowdsourcing of metadata, which results in an immensely messy sort of set of tags, inconsistent. Some of them actually inaccurate but still useful. That mess is itself really useful, and because it turns out that messiness is how you scale meaning. If you want to get lots of meaning within a global network, then you're going to have to tolerate messiness in a way that the old order of knowledge absolutely rejected. Old order of knowledge was about Linnaeus and classification schemes where everything has a single spot. That does not scale. By the way, with the science example, we might also say that disagreement is how you scale knowledge. If you want everybody to agree, you're just not going to get knowledge big enough. Maybe one more example, which is, I guess I'll use Reddit. reddit.com. We're a very popular site, especially with a particular demographic. So it's actually fairly diverse, but there are a set of values that Reddit holds that turn it technically into an echo chamber. That is, which is a set of people who share beliefs, who reinforce those beliefs. And the danger of echo chambers is that we get reinforced on the web in our existing beliefs, which may be false, rather than getting opened up to new beliefs. So here's Reddit, a site that I'm really fascinated with and really like, even though much of the content is sort of not my, I'm a 61-year-old guy, much of the content is not I'm outside of their demographic by a long shot. So Reddit has a set of values. It's basically, of course, not everybody, but it assumes atheism. It assumes a sort of libertarian approach. It assumes tolerance, and it's pro-gay marriage. And it has values of acceptance, which I think is just fantastic, and altruism. They conspicuously care for one another at Reddit. Reddit, by the way, I should neglected to mention, is a site where people post links to stuff on the web. Those links get voted up or down, and then they're conversational threads. So the reason I bring up Reddit, which is both a set of knowledge networks and technically an echo chamber, is that one of the things that Reddit does is invite in people, enable people with whom they profoundly disagree. They invite them in to engage in an open and frank group discussion in these threaded forums. So somebody might step forward and say, I am a Christian fundamentalist. Remember, this is an atheist, basically an atheistic group. Or I am a Rick Santorum supporter from a few months ago. And this is a group that tends to be quite liberal. It sort of assumes Obama. And so somebody will step forward, and there will be quite often a remarkable conversation. Frank and honest. They go wrong when the person who is stepping forward isn't frank and honest. If the person is not responding or not responding honestly, then it can become savagely funny and savage. But so long as the person is talking in good faith, this is one of the best places I've seen for the discussion across profound differences. So here's my point. This is a knowledge network of a sort, where ideas will get posted and elaborated on in quite expert and interesting ways. So it is a knowledge network, set of knowledge networks. It is an echo chamber, technically, set of people who have the same set of values, same set of beliefs, and talk amongst themselves. But because it has this strong set of shared values, and in particular because one of those values is openness and tolerance and altruism, they are able to engage with others with whom they profoundly disagree better than I have seen almost anywhere in the mainstream media, for example. So there are knowledge networks all around us. They have a very different sense of what constitutes knowledge, and I continue to think that the best way to think about this is to see the knowledge happening at the level of the network, of the links and connections to points of view that disagree in one way or another. It's much less of a view of knowledge as a type of content that's been settled. So let's come back to libraries, if that's okay. Because I want to suggest is one way to think about libraries as platforms is, well, what are platforms enabling? They are, in one sense, they are enabling the development of software, and as I said, I'm very interested in that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the real thing, the most important thing that they're enabling is not software, but it's these sorts of networks, and in this case, knowledge networks. So let me just make, sort of put in parentheses, the sense in which a library platform is also a software development platform, because I do think that's important. It's just not the most important thing. So if you take a library platform in that sense, as a software platform, then I think one of the ways of thinking about this is to do it in contrast, that's always useful, to the traditional way that libraries generally have handled information. Libraries, like everybody just about, every business, installed information systems, database management systems, and the like, in order to provide some particular services that their users needed, which is great, and that's how you did it. So you've got a database manager, you set it up, you set up a schema that decided what sorts of information would be useful for particular services, to let users check out books and to be able to send overdue notices, etc. In the world of the web, one of the things that Web 2.0 has changed, I think, is that when we think about information systems now, rather than thinking about them as being for providing particular services, and thus the information system should be behind a wall that nobody can see except for the people who are managing it. And instead, all that you see are the results of this information management system and the services that are provided. Instead of thinking that way in Web 2.0, we think, well, you know, we have all this information, and we can help build the overall environment, the overall ecosystem, if we make this information available widely and broadly for services that we have not anticipated. So we know we have to enable checkouts, but we don't know what other uses our data can be put to. So rather than looking inward, let's look outwards. Let's make every piece of data that we have available, every piece of metadata, including metadata created incidentally by users as they interact with the system. Of course, we will always withhold that which might violate privacy, but there's a huge amount of data and metadata that can be made available. Let's do this in web standard forms, providing open APIs, application programming interfaces, so that developers can write programs that talk directly to our stores of data. Let's do it with maybe linked open data. Let's provide documentation and tools. Let's do everything we can to facilitate the creation of applications, software programs by our users and by people around the world that can get more value from what we know, from our data. I think that's really, I'm tremendously excited about this as a possibility, not just a possibility, it's becoming a reality. And that is a strong sense in which a library is a platform, but that's not the most important sense in which I'm suggesting it. So libraries or platforms mean that, for one thing, they will have portals into this, into their resources so the users can get at it. And libraries platform means that it will provide tools, services, and data so that software developers can create new applications. But the primary thing, my argument is, that platforms will do for libraries is enable the growth of the sorts of networks that I was just talking about. Now, I've been talking about knowledge networks because, as I say, I've been thinking and writing about knowledge, and I'm at a university library, but it's not just about pure knowledge. Nevertheless, I'm going to stick with that as my example. So how does a library platform do this? Well, it's not at all clear to me that this means that libraries should go out and create their own social networks. There may well be reasons and times to do that, but as a first impulse, yeah, that's probably wrong. You know, the world doesn't necessarily need another social network. Users are not eager to sign up for yet another social network. So we certainly should be thinking about how we can use the existing social networks and have them integrate with the tools, services, and data that our libraries can give access to if they are platforms. Second thing about this platform for knowledge networks is that, as I said at the beginning, we're not starting with this is for digital only and that's for analog only. The idea of library as a platform, I think, encompasses both. There are ways in which you develop knowledge networks or social networks that are centered around the content of libraries, which for shorthand I can call books. That is, you can think about a book or a DVD or an article as being a social object. A social object is an object that forms social networks around it. In the real world, the best social object ever is a puppy. Take a puppy for a walk, and you will form a social network as you walk down the street. Books are wonderful social objects. They get their meaning and their value from their participation in our culture, in our set of cultural networks. So if books are social objects and libraries are platforms, then there's some sort of, the aim of which is to enable, facilitate, and foster these sorts of networks of knowledge and ideas and of culture. Then some of those networks are enabled in physical space. Some are enabled by physical books, or some by ebooks, and some are enabled in digital space, and we can design the facilities that make sense. But the idea of knowledge as a platform for enabling these networks does not apply only to digital or only to real world. I think it's an idea that encompasses both and lets us think about the relationship of those two. Because we can think about how we can use all of these affordances, the real and the virtual, in order to enable our community to grow richer in its appropriation and appreciation of what libraries know. It is absolutely crucial to this notion of libraries as a platform, the chief value of which is that a platform increases the value of the existing assets. It makes them more widely available, more widely used, and more widely appreciated. So it's crucial to this that the platform provide ways in which all of the value that is generated on top of this platform by the users is fed back into the platform, becomes available to other users. Now, all is an overstatement. Privacy and sharing, certainly, privacy is certainly an issue that needs to be taken very seriously. Lots of people may not want to share what they, their social interactions or what they're developing. That's 100% fine, of course. But we want to encourage as much of what gets developed on top of this platform to become available to everybody else who uses the platform, because then the library gains more and more and more value. This is a virtuous circle, which is just the right type of circle to have. The next thing about libraries as platforms that I think is important is that I believe, my intuition is that it's important that that these platforms be coextensive with the geographic area, just as public libraries are or university libraries are. That is, they're going to serve a local community. This is for a couple of reasons that have to do with the nature of of knowledge networks or cultural networks. Communities, by serving a local community, the platform can gain a sense of what's relevant to that community. And what's relevant to that community is by definition, is what's going to be most interesting and at least initially valuable to that community. Within the university, it's very clear. The community is the teachers and the scholars, the researchers, the students, and what's relevant to that community is immensely valuable, but the same is true for a public library. There's also local knowledge that can be assumed. You need a great deal of similarity and sameness in order to be able to have a conversation even, or for a valuable knowledge or cultural network to emerge. And communities tend to share local knowledge. And if the local community is fragmented, as is the case, as in the case for many of the communities that local libraries serve, that's both an issue, but it's also, because networks are about links, this is an opportunity to have the sort of cross-border discussion that heals communities. It also suggests new roles for librarians, this idea of library as platform. The old roles are still there, but I want to point to one, which is that if the new networked idea of knowledge includes difference and disagreement, there, as a positive thing, not all disagreement is positive. So disagreement where people are yelling at each other really isn't helpful. It in fact tends to drive people back into their echo chambers, where an echo chamber can make you stupider. You're hanging out with people who all believe the same thing, and you end up dumber and more closed-minded than ever, which is not what we want. And so I think there's a new role for librarians, which they've always served, but I think it emphasizes this role. Not just pointing to authoritative and worthwhile sources, but especially pointing to the disagreements. It's getting easier to find authoritative sources quickly. We can go wrong easily, but it's getting easier to do that. I think it's getting harder, or at least there's a huge opportunity, to be directed to sources that disagree in useful ways. So if it's somebody comes in who wants, in either virtually or physically, and wants information about some sort of initial orientation in some topic, you want to point that person to more or less the canon, especially if you have the sense of community relevance. But this is what everybody in this field is reading and needs to know. But here are the disagreements. here are the good places to look for interesting, serious disagreements. And I think that's something that librarians, as I say, of course librarians already do this, but I think it's becoming more important. In a library as platform, I think it becomes crucial. So almost done. There are a set of obstacles to this. One is a conceptual one, working out this idea, getting used to it. I have neither worked it out nor am I entirely used to it. Second is it suggests a set of technical skills that that librarians have not traditionally been trained in, but there are so many amazingly good-hearted and amazingly knowledgeable and amazingly innovative library technologists these days, and I'm quite hopeful that we're going to see many, many more. This is such a rich area. But that is another issue, finding people with the right skills. And the third is this question of privacy, which does keep coming up. I think actually one of the reasons I like the idea of libraries platforms is that it gives us a way to think about privacy that gets it closer to how our culture is moving. Our culture is not moving, at least in America, generally. The kids don't care about their privacy nearly as much. In fact, the concept is becoming muddled as much as traditionally libraries have, and so we need to be rethinking that. I'll just say one sentence about that, which is I find the debate between public and private to be often not very helpful, since it leaves out the term that we really need, which is social. And if you start talking about social, then the questions of public and private get at least cast in a different light, and I think sometimes get a little bit easier. So overall, this pitch for libraries as platforms is based upon trying to come up with ways in which libraries can get every drop of value from everything that they know, every resource, every book, CD, article, every bit of wisdom and expertise that librarians bring, everything that the community knows individually and together, everything that every idea and argument and discussion that any social object in the library causes, all of this can dramatically increase the value of libraries, which is, I think, exactly what our challenge is right now. Thank you.
So, David, do you want to do Q&A?
Sure.
One question I'll start off with right off the bat. We heard earlier today Singapore describe an Amazon-like system where when users check out a book, it tells them of other users who like that book, what other books they liked. Is that the kind of implementation that you're talking about? And I think your mic is off, or maybe we lost you.
Sorry, I double-clicked it. Not the brightest tool in the shed, sharpest tool in the shed. Anyway, so it's obviously a good service to provide. We know this because Amazon is making buckets and buckets of money doing it. They're selling lots and lots of books. So this is something that works. It is one example of what can be done with the sort of metadata that users leave behind incidentally. So Amazon is doing all sorts of things that libraries may not have the stomach for, but it's looking, it knows every time you click how long you spend on a page, what the sequence of pages is. They have a huge amount of data, and they're able to make very sensible recommendations. Libraries also have really interesting data and metadata, which could be used to make similar sorts of recommendations, and libraries, I presume, would do it in extremely open ways. Amazon is slightly open. They will show you some of why they recommended this book that actually makes no sense to you so that you can tune their system. Libraries could do this in far more open ways, in ways that are tuned to the values and interests of the particular community. But it is just an example. It's a particularly good example. A recommendation system, I think, is a particularly good example, but it's just one example of what could be done on a software side with a library as a platform.
So Peggy's asked two questions there. The first one was if you could expand on the privacy point. She says she's not used to thinking about privacy as related to the library except to teach kids about online safety.
Well, so maybe I'm running into, maybe it's just a coincidence that I keep running into this issue. Libraries have a ton of data. They're very careful, generally, is my understanding, to expunge information that could identify the, say, reading habits of individuals. So, and tell me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that libraries expunge the user identifiers from their circulation records after the books are checked in on some schedule. It might be 6 weeks or 6 months, but they expunge them so that the government, for example, cannot request to see those logs and discover or get led to believe that somebody is, in the classical example, that somebody is a terrorist because she checked out the anarchist cookbook and travel guide to Iran or Afghanistan or whatever it is because she's a high school student doing a report. So libraries have been a bastion of privacy. As I say, users these days, especially younger users, don't care nearly as much. It may be that the library should act sort of in loco parentis and care for those users on the grounds that those users that their library's users don't understand the risks as well as the librarians do, and that's an arguable point. My preference personally would be to move much more to an opt-in system. And we are seeing that in libraries because, for example, having the library keep track of which books I've checked out would be really useful. I would like that. I don't care. Personally, I don't care if the government knows every book I've ever checked out. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying I don't care. And so being able to opt into a system where the library kept track of those, thus subject to government subpoena or to Homeland Security surreptitious requests, and even I would allow my list of books to be made public to other library users because it might be useful or interesting to them. I'm sorry, I'm going on too long. I'm going to give you one quick example that we've run into, which is where I work, where we would like to, we're really interested in knowing what the relationships among books are, sort of semantically, by subject, beyond the classifications that are extremely useful, that are provided, the categories. And one of the ways of knowing that is to see which books are checked out together. That can give you, with enough data, can give you a rough, very imperfect sense of which books are like one another or maybe on the same topic. And that is to say, lots of ways to go wrong, but there are good hints in there. But if you do that, if you know what the bundle of books is, there is a vanishingly small possibility that an extremely clever hacker could work backwards from that with some other pieces of data and figure out who's been checking out the books. And because of that vanishingly small possibility, we're not allowed to use that data. We don't know what that data is, in fact. That might be a real risk of invading privacy. It might be. I sort of think that it isn't, but the real thing is that we need some science here. We don't know what the risks are. We don't have a way of quantifying those risks and thus making rational decisions. Hackers are extremely clever. We could use some research and science in this field. Anyway, so privacy is a constraint on the openness of data and metadata that prevents the full use of that metadata and data. It may be, and often is, of course, a proper constraint, but we need to be thinking about what the balance between risk and value is, in my opinion. Hello?
Okay, Peggy asked a question earlier that didn't come up, but it was a question about the value of students or users being taught, hang on here, She wanted to know if it's important to teach kids and teachers how to create infographics to build this learning network.
So infographics are an interesting tool. If I sound unenthusiastic, it's because I can make no sense of the visualization of quantitative information. I actually personally respond very poorly to visualizations. My brain is not wired for that. So I'm sure that they seem to be very useful and very popular. They can reveal interesting things. It's one thing to do. I don't know that it's a crucial thing to do. Just don't know. And I'm the wrong person to ask.
So we do still have about 5 or 6 minutes. If you've got a question for David, please feel free to put it in the chat. I apologize if I've missed one. I don't think I have, but please post it again if I have. Or you can raise your hand. That's the hand icon, the third one over in the participant window. We are getting into some interesting discussions here, David, about the difference between a willingness to be open and those who would use data for manipulative purposes. Is that a reasonable kind of distinction to make?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I'm trying to follow the discussion, by the way. Yes, I mean that is the problem is that you can't tell them apart until they've acted. So if you have an open platform that's providing access to metadata, you don't know who's going to. It's open. You don't know who's going to use it, and so you have to try to think ahead to all the ways in which this data might be misused or used for nefarious purposes, and then you have to make a risk-benefit decision. As I say, I would feel better about these decisions if we actually had some science behind the risk assessment, which frequently we do not. We have common sense assumptions, but common sense does not hold in the world of big data. It doesn't scale, which means that there are things that we might think are perfectly safe that turn out to be risky. For example, making available information about which bundles of books have been checked out together. It could well be that a scientific assessment of this would show that that is, in fact, really dangerous information. There are lots of examples in the history of the web where things that looked like innocuous releases of information actually resulted in hideous betrayals of personal privacy. So we need to be thinking about this. The two things I would say is, first, we need to balance risk and benefit, not just be risk-free, because nothing is risk-free. And the second thing is, won't somebody please do some research so that we know what the risks actually are?
I don't think I've seen another question, but again, we have probably time at least for one more question if you want to put it in the chat or to raise your hand. David, as usual, fascinating.
Well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me in. It's, and very loving the discussion thread.
I appreciate your making time to do this, given your heavy travel schedule, and also overcoming the Mac OS, the 10.7 Java issue, which I'm appreciative that you actually found a solution for so we can post it. Thanks again, David. That was terrific.
Yeah, I'll mail it to you in a few minutes. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks to David for being here. Sure a fun day. Hope that you find something else to do today in the conference that's worthwhile for you. Take care. Bye now.